My name is Khanya Mashabela, and I'm talking to FAKA, which is made up of Desire Marea and Fela Gucci. And so my first question to the both of you is that, FAKA's production spans music, performance, photography, video, and writing. And you found recognition in the realms of music, fashion, and contemporary art, showing on Fashion Week, but also showing in contemporary art galleries and in the Berlin Biennale. So I basically wanted to ask, when you created the collective, who were you directing your art towards? Like, who was your ideal audience?
I think when we started, actually, we were just like sort of like experimenting as like friends who have always sort of like had an interest in like art and stuff. And then I guess like we weren't sort of like seeing ourselves in a lot of spaces, like spaces that you mentioned, like institutions or like, yeah, like arts, like galleries or whatever. So yeah, like I guess, yeah, we sort of wanted to see ourselves and people who come from our experience in those spaces, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and to kind of reach like as broad audiences as anyone else would producing the art that you're making.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you've described FAKA as being more than a collective, but also being a kind of a cultural movement. And when I kind of look at kind of how things have shifted in South Africa, mainly in Cape Town and Johannesburg, where I have kind of the most experience, I've seen that you have had an effect on kind of the discourse and even on the culture. So I kind of wanted to ask, what do you think that your impact has been, kind of on the discourse as a cultural movement?
Yeah, so I think it has always been like our chosen modality of activism, the creative side of it. So that's how we've decided to contribute to the discourse and the conversation. And by being cultural workers, it's also something that was motivated by the fact that we realized that the culture was the core of like people's actions, and it was usually the motivation for a lot of people's outlooks and actions, basically, you know. And it's not necessarily so much. I mean, legislation is very much important. You know, we need that kind of institutional support, but on the cultural level, we also do kind of need to like have a shift. So I think our focus was usually like in that realm, you know. And I think in as far as like where our impact is and how far we've impacted culture in Johannesburg or in South Africa, I think that is something that we can comfortably like, you know, say that we've seen the results. But it's not just us. I think it was like a collective effort from ourselves and other queer people and other Black people who just had like a greater, better imagination for our experience, for our futures. And that is something that is truly just amazing to see.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And I wanted to bring that up, especially when you talk about cultural work. A big part of your practice is collaboration. And I think that that's part of being a cultural worker. How do you kind of navigate that collaboration, kind of maintaining your own vision while also kind of opening yourselves up to other visions?
By collaboration, do you mean collaboration amongst ourselves as like two individuals in FAKA, or?
Yeah, I think that both.
FAKA and
obviously, your collaboration with each other, but you're also collaborating with other photographers and like filmmakers and other, as you said, other queer people in the community, kind of working together to produce kind of different projects. And so I was kind of interested in what that process looks like.
It's usually like, I think you can also elaborate on this, Fela, but just meeting at a common goal. I think that's something that always drives collaborations. It's something that's driven our collaboration. we met at a place where we were aligned with what we envisioned for ourselves and what we wanted for ourselves and wanted to achieve for ourselves and the community, basically. And I think that kind of like seeped into like our other collaborations as well, that kind of process. Yeah, but Fela, I don't know if
in terms of like collaboration, yeah, I think like in terms of like us sort of putting ideas together, I guess it sort of comes from like, I guess, different like mediums that we sort of like, I guess sort of like me as a photographer, and like, I guess like coming together with Desire also as like someone who has like a visual language, and then just sort of like combining those elements together with like music in terms of like producing and like lyrics and yeah.
I think it's also interesting because when you speak about like cultural work and cultural activism, and also thinking about like Blackness and queerness, it obviously connects. I mean, we have this Nela Moholi exhibition up right now, and I think that there's kind of parallels in your kind of vision for kind of creating space for queer Black people in culture. Kind of what do you think about your environments encouraged you to kind of approach creating a platform in such a fierce way in terms of your experiences? Especially talking about Blackness and talking about queerness, and this idea of being an activist. Like, what do you think influenced you in that regard?
I would say personally, what influenced me was knowing that it is possible for Blackness to be one with queerness. And I think growing up, I always kind of like, I mean, because of like poor representation, you know, I mean, I knew that a lot of Black queer people existed, but the perception was always that Black people are largely like homophobic, you know, and it is like a really unfair misconception. It is, of course, like rooted in a lot of like factual happenings, you know, and like lots of violent acts, you know, that do take place within Blackness. But I think what that did for a lot of queer people, especially from our generation, it really did separate us and like alienate us from the experience of Blackness. And so primarily, I think just realizing also from like being accepted by my family, by my Black family from KwaZulu Natal, that is something that empowered me and showed me that it is actually a possibility to be loved by your family, by your community. And it shouldn't actually, and that's a narrative that should be shared, you know. It's not like the exception breaks the rule, but it just inspires us to do more, or myself and us to do more work to create that reality for other people. And yeah, that's been kind of
yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. Like my cousin as well, my late cousin, who was trans and very like visible in like the community and stuff. And yeah, like just extending to what like Desire is saying, is that like queer and trans people are celebrated in Black communities. And yeah, there's just sort of like this, yeah, narrative that like, I guess like Black communities are not always safe spaces for queer and trans people. But I also feel like that's like a narrative that's always sort of, I don't know, like used for middle class like, politics and stuff, and people who actually don't engage with like those spaces and aren't fully like aware of like the dynamics and the possibilities of like queer people and trans people in like Black communities like that. Yeah.
And I think it also, agreeing with what you guys are saying, I think that it also kind of ignores a history of kind of Black queerness that goes beyond kind of Western conceptions of what queerness means. Like that didn't start with kind of a Western approach. Yeah, I think that's really meaningful and really important. Kind of the overemphasis on a sadder version of the story, rather than also talking about stories of acceptance and love. Yeah. I think that I also, I'm kind of curious as well about how you see FAKA developing in the future, because I mean, obviously you're largely working with performance and making music and that kind of thing. And I wondered, is there kind of a plan to work in kind of other fields in a more kind of full way, in terms of thinking about contemporary art and kind of visual art, or do you feel that your videos and your music videos in particular already encompass the kind of full kind of spectrum of your vision?
I think there's definitely space to go deeper in our disciplines as FAKA. But that is obviously something that I feel like is usually like the purpose drives that, you know. I think at any given time in our practice as FAKA, whatever the medium was, whatever the end product was always kind of informed by what we wanted that to do, you know, for wherever we were, whether we were, you know, creating imagery or music or visuals for the music or performances that are obviously usually somehow linked back to the music as well. But I think we don't know obviously where this is going to go. We just playing it by ear, letting it be organic. But I think it is something that we always want to be driven and motivated and informed by the greater purpose. And we are at the purpose stage, you know.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I think that's a really kind of sensitive way of approaching it, and a more meaningful way of approaching it. I'm kind of not working for the sake of working, but to realize a vision. And the last thing that I wanted to ask was just thinking about, obviously, the fact that a large portion of your kind of artistic practice is live performance. And kind of that being kind of placed on pause. Has it been a moment for you to think about working in different ways, and what's kind of your more immediate plans in that sense?
I'll be working on like an upcoming project, and I'll be working with like a collective from like Canada as well. So basically, I guess we sort of like creating in our own spaces, but also sharing ideas, and I guess making art in that way outside of performance at the moment.
Yeah. Are there any plans to kind of perform in virtual spaces? Have you been doing that, or do you plan to do that?
Well, Desire is performing with
I'm gonna be premiering a virtual concert next Saturday.
Amazing. Okay.
I think that is probably the one thing that was influenced by COVID. But it's honestly, I mean, I agree that things we need to adjust. But I don't think we'll ever adjust out of the need for like a live audience and that immediate energy exchange. It's very important to us. And so, I mean, we are working on a lot of projects. We're working on a film project that we're currently developing with, as Fela mentioned, other artists and other collectives. And that feels like something that, you know, that won't feel like too misplaced. You know, it can feel, it can still feel very joyful. Yeah, and yeah, I think we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I find that that even though the virtual performance kind of feels, it sounds forced in theory, in practice, it's actually kind of a beautiful thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing that on Saturday. Um, and then finally, I just wanted to kind of go back to what you said about the idea that you wanted to see yourself in institutional spaces where you hadn't seen yourselves, and where you felt excluded. And I wondered, do you feel now that you've kind of been welcomed by those spaces? And is there ever, from your side, do you ever feel like there's an imbalance still? Kind of what's your experience in that regard?
I don't necessarily, like at the moment, I don't necessarily feel like I need to exist in those spaces. I think at a particular time, it was sort of very important to be visible and to like occupy those spaces. But yeah, just right now, I'm just sort of like, just like also just returning to I don't know how to properly phrase this, but just like remembering the importance of, I guess, like the community where I come from, and sort of creating some sort of like cultural space there as well, and just just a cultural like exchange there.
Okay, so yeah, I see what you mean. Kind of placing a greater emphasis on the communities that you've made, rather than communities that have to accept you, quote unquote. Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach.
Definitely.
Yeah, and thinking about kind of the communities that you've made, I was also interested in talking about the parties. There was Kanti power that existed. Is that kind of still the realm in which you kind of perceive your community, kind of that kind of club culture and that kind of that kind of queer Black space, or has your kind of your idea of what a community is kind of expanded?
I think, when we initially like started Kanti Power, like there wasn't enough sort of like queer spaces, like more inclusive and actually like alternative spaces for like queer people. It was mostly just there's a club called Liquid Blue, and it's just like super mask and the music is like horrible. So like we just wanted to create a space for, I guess, people like us, and also make it like a space for like experimental music. So pretty much like experimental, but also just like currently I don't know, I feel like nightlife is important for queer people, but I also feel like it's important for us to create community outside of that, because also in those spaces there's like a lot of also very like, I guess, like toxic elements. So I would love for us to sort of have like a space where we actually can just like sit and have conversations and just engage on that level, because it's not always, I guess, like productive. And this is not to like erase the work that also like a lot of, I guess, the like queer cultural producers in the city are doing in terms of like creating community that way. But I do feel like it is possible for us to create spaces outside of nightlife, because it's not always inclusive of everyone's sort of like experience.
Not just your identities, but also not inclusive of all mindsets, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's really interesting. Okay, thank you so much for answering my questions. It was really lovely to have you. I think this is going to be a kind of a great contribution to the way that we think about not just Senile Moholi's practice, but kind of Black queer practice in general. Yeah, I hope to see you soon, or I will be seeing you soon on Saturday when I watch your concert.